Good evening, everyone. So this evening's going to be a little different than what we've done in the past. We'll start out, of course, with a prayer and some chanting and meditation for about 15 minutes or so. And then we'll show you tonight a production of P.G. Woodhouse's Goodbye to All Cats. And then, before that, I'll probably talk a little bit about creativity and consciousness, and then we'll also end with some music. So, let's begin with a prayer. Divine Mother, Heavenly Father, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Shri Yukteswar, Paramahansa Yogananda Ji, all saints and sages, we lovingly invoke thy presence. Blessed Masters, bring this evening your creative muses, that we might feel their inspiration, their love, their clarity. Be with us tonight. Help us to experience your creativity through our actions, through our thoughts, through our words. We are thine, be thou ours. Om peace. Amen. Brahmanandam Paramasugaram Kevalam Gyanamutim Dandwatitam Gagana Sadrisham Tatvarmasya Dilaksham Ekyam Nityam Vimalamachalam Sadvade Sakshi Bhutam Bhavatitam Trigunarhahitam Sadguru Twanamami, full of bliss, giving joy transcendent of higher knowledge, the abode, do all no more, clear as the heavens, known to all as thou art that. He is pure, permanent, unmoving, the everlasting seer of all, far, far beyond qualities and thought. Guru Lord, I bow to thee. Guru Lord, I bow to thee. Full of bliss, giving joy transcendent of higher knowledge, the abode, do all no more, clear as the heavens, known to all as thou art that. He is pure, permanent, unmoving, the everlasting seer of all, far, far beyond qualities and thought. Guru Lord, I bow to thee. Guru Lord, I bow to thee. Oh, 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 I am Om, I am Om, I am Om, I am Om, omnipresent to me. Come to me, oh, come to me. Om, Om, come to me. Come to me, oh, come to me. I am Om, I am Om, I am Om, I am Om. Omnipresent I am Om, all pervading I am Om, all blessed I am Om. Om, Om, come to me, come to me, oh, come to me. Om, Om, come to me, come to me, oh, come to me. I am Om, I am Om, I am Om, I am Om. Omnipresent I am Om, all pervading I am Om, all blessed I am Om. Om, Om, come to me, come to me, oh, come to me. Om, Om, come to me, come to me, oh, come to me. I am Om, I am Om, I am Om, I am Om. And we'll meditate now for about 10, maybe 15 minutes. So we'll hear a song now that was written by Swami Kriyananda called Come Gather Round.
Come gather round, let joy sing out today. Dawn now is breaking, and the mountains say, it's only light can make the darkness run. Lift up your head, greet the rising sun. Greet the rising sun. Some people think to harvest happiness by weeding troubles, easing every stress. The trouble is that troubles never end. Get rid of one and you face its friend. And you face its friend. It's in your heart the songs of joy resound. You'll hear but echoes in the world around. Wind on a hill sounds lonely if you're sad, free if you're free, cheerful if you're glad. Cheerful if you're glad. Friends, come with me. We'll chant of battles won, shouts not of anger. Joy will be our gun. Before the light, the veils of sorrow rend. In inner freedom, all delusions end. All delusions end.
So I'm just going to speak just a little bit about creativity, conscious creativity. God has given man the power to destroy or the power to create. We have the ability to make the world beautiful or to destroy it. And don't think that man's actions go unnoticed by God. And every single action, any ability that transgresses against natural order it's recorded in the ether, in the past and in the future. And I don't know how many of you have been watching Inner Renewal Week at Ananda Village this week, but on the first day, which was Monday's talk by Jyotish and Devi, Jyotish talked about how Master said, Yogananda said, that at the end of the First World War, the vibrations that were created by that war, we're feeling those now. Those have created the impact that we are having now, not only on our environment, but on our health and on the problems that mankind is having. Swami Kriyananda said that our vibrations, what we put out, can be felt in the most distant planet. So that's a lot of responsibility when you think about it. And when the earth becomes heavy with disease and evil, then these etheric disturbances cause what we know of as earthquakes, floods, natural disasters. It's just like the human body. It's like if we put out, if we overeat, we gain weight. We get out of balance. we create disharmony within our body. If we think ill thoughts, we create disharmony within our body. It's the same with the planet. And it's the same with the vibration that we all feel together, that we all, how we treat each other, the effect of what we're thinking, of what we're doing, has taken place quite a bit earlier in the past, and is only now surfacing. Anger, hatred, it all affects the magnetic vibrations of the planet. But the good news is, Yogananda said, is that our planet is not going to take a dive, not just yet. He said that we have enough good karma that we're able to keep it going. And so he said, goodwill will triumph. Self-interest, prejudice, hatred, and anger, we've got to rise above all of this. We've got to rise above the age in which we were born. And for those of you who might be artists in one way or another, whether it be through visual arts or the performing arts or whatever art form, architecture, gardening, cooking, there's so many different ways that we express ourselves creatively. Mathematicians can be extremely creative. For those of us that want to express ourselves creatively, we've got to, like Master said, learn to rise above the times that we're in and decide what it is we want to do with our art. Do we want to uplift mankind? Do we want to use it strictly as a means of therapy for ourselves? Or do we want to consciously approach it? Swami said that feeling, of course, feeling is one of the most important aspects of creativity, and it's got to be combined with action. And that the intellect, if we're looking in terms of healing ourselves, can actually take us into despair if we allow it. Of course, it's wonderful in the sense that we can use it for discrimination. But really, when we're creating something, we go more towards our feelings, and we put them into action. And what better healing is there than love? And if we can bring love into all of our creativity, we could actually work towards healing the planet. Now, for some of us, our creativity can be, especially when you're working more consciously, creativity can be extremely subtle. It doesn't mean it doesn't have an impact. It doesn't mean it doesn't have an impact not only on those that view it, but on those that are creating it. When I was first getting onto the path, I went to Italy and lived in Assisi for a few months, or with our center there, actually. We weren't in Assisi at the time. But I went to Florence, and I was very shut down initially. But having been around the art there, Da Vinci, Michelangelo, the experience of, it was such a heart-opening experience for me. And it was the beginnings of a huge healing for me. So art has that ability. It has that ability to heal. And that's something that we really need on this planet right now. So again, getting back to what Master said, we have to rise above the times that we're in. When you listen to Swami's music, the song that we just played, he talks about that. He talks about how we focus on our problems, and then what happens? We get rid of one, and then all of a sudden another one comes in its place. The intellect can take us into despair. When I had actually had I've had a lot of karma, as most of us have probably in this life. And I've dealt with a lot of grief. I've lost a lot of people. And I thought one time, I'm going to put myself into, I'm going to take a weekend, and I'm just going to go into seclusion. And I had talked with some grief counselors, and I was going to take with me some little tricks that they had given me and do some little projects. And it didn't take long before I did go into despair. I went into such a deep, deep grief. I couldn't bring myself out of it. So I got up. I knew I had to do something. I had to change the energy somehow. So I got up and I went for a walk. And, excuse me, I went for a walk. And I walked past a statue of Yogananda. And I was drawn to that statue, and I sat by it. And within minutes, I felt him come, envelop me with his love, and I was healed. I literally was healed within a minute or two. He totally transformed my consciousness. And we have that ability. The more we tune into the Guru, the more we tune into the teachings that we've been given, the more we try to lift ourselves up, we can lift up mankind. And we have negative thoughts. If we project those outwards, the energy goes down the spine. If we can send the energy up the spine, that's when the healing can happen. That's when we can work to help transform the planet. And that's when we're working consciously with our own creativity. I watched, one of my favorite things to watch is Rudolf Nureyev and Margot Fonteyn. And they danced Romeo and Juliet. And if you were to watch that and really study it, you could see Margot Fonteyn is in a completely different reality. She's in a superconscious state as she dances. So keep that in mind when it comes to your own creative expression. And it also works well into the art of living, because the whole concept of living, especially on the spiritual path, it's an art. It's an art form. And we all have to learn how to do that within our own lives. So we're going to show you a video. It's called Goodbye to All Cats. And it was written by P.G. Woodhouse, who wrote towards the end of the, well, let's see, when did he write? Not towards the end of the century. He wrote much earlier, much later than that. But I think he wrote around the 20s. Yeah, he wrote around the 20s. And you know, a lot of people, I think, have a little bit of trouble with P.G. Woodhouse. Well, I was one of those people when I first heard him. He didn't do much for me, but then I started to act his stuff. And I started to see how incredibly absurd he is. I really, really started to enjoy his stuff. So, his writings, excuse me, I shouldn't say stuff, but his writings. And he was a banker when he was a young man, and the thing that I love about P.G. Woodhouse, he was able to watch a lot of wealthy people. So he pokes fun at them, but no one gets out of P.G. Woodhouse. No one. He pokes fun at everyone. And it's not a mean kind of cynical humor. It's absurd, which life is and can be at times, and it's just fun. It's very light, and if you remember, if you're a movie buff at all, you know that at the end of the wars or during the wars, that was the kind of entertainment that was coming out. That's what people needed to see. So anyway, we hope you enjoy this. I had a lot of fun doing it. I did it with 3 other community members, Hara, Prem, and Terry. And we performed it at Christmas. So it's been put into a video form, and we're going to show it to you now. Goodbye to All Cats by Mr. P.G. Woodhouse. As the club kittens sauntered into the smoking room of the Drones Club and greeted those present with a friendly meow, Freddie Widgeon, who had been sitting in a corner with his head between his hands, rose stiffly.
I had supposed that this was a quiet retreat for gentlemen. As I perceive that it is a blasted zoo, I will withdraw.
And he left the room in a marked manner. There was a good deal of surprise mixed with consternation.
"What's the trouble?"
asked an egg concerned. Such exhibitions of the naked emotions are rare at the Drones.
"Have they had a row?"
A crumpet, always well informed, shook his head.
Freddie has had no personal breach with this particular kitten. It is simply that since that weekend at Matcham Scratchings, he can't stand the sight of a cat.
Matcham what?
Scratchings, the ancestral home of Dahlia Prenderby in Oxfordshire.
I met Dahlia Prenderby once. I thought she seemed a nice girl.
Freddie thought so too. He loved her madly.
And lost her, of course.
Absolutely. Do you know, I'll bet that if all the girls Freddie Widgeon has loved and lost were placed end to end, not that I suppose one could do it, they would reach halfway down Piccadilly.
Further than that, I suppose. Some of them were pretty tall. What beats me is why he ever bothers to love them. They always turn him down in the end. He might just as well never begin. Better, in fact, because in the time saved, he could be reading some good book.
I think the trouble with Freddie is that he always gets off to a flying start. He's a good-looking sort of chap who dances well and can wiggle his ears, and the girl is dazzled for the moment, and this encourages him. From what he tells me, he appears to have gone very big with this Prenderby girl at the outset. So much so, indeed, that when she invited him down to Matcham Scratchings, he had already bought his copy of what every young bridegroom ought to know.
Rummy, these old country house names. Why Scratchings, I wonder?
Freddie wondered too, till he got to the place. Then he tells us he felt it was absolutely the most juste. The girl Dahlia's family, you see, was one of those animal-loving families, and the house, he tells me, was just a frothing maelstrom of dumb chums. As far as the eye could reach, there were dogs scratching themselves and cats scratching the furniture. I believe, though, he never met it socially. There was even a tame chimpanzee somewhere on the premises, no doubt scratching away as assiduously as the rest. You get these conditions here and there in the depths of this country, and this Matcham place was well away from the center of things, being about 6 miles from the nearest station. And it was at this station that Dahlia Prenderby met Freddie in her two-seater. And on the way to the house there occurred a conversation which I consider significant, showing as it does the cordial relations existing between the young couple at that point in the proceedings. I mean, it was only later that the bitter awakening and all that sort of thing popped up.
I do want you to be a success, Freddie,
said the girl after talking a while of this and that.
Some of the men I've asked down here have been such awful flops. The great thing is to make a good impression on Father.
I will.
He can be a little difficult at times.
Lead me to him. That's all I ask. Lead me to him.
The trouble is he doesn't much like young men.
He'll like me.
He will he?
Rather.
What makes you think that?
I'm a dashed fascinating chap.
Oh, are you?
Yes, I am.
You are you?
Rather.
Upon which she gave him a sort of a push, and he gave her a sort of a push, and she giggled, and he laughed like a paper bag bursting, and she gave him a kind of a shove, and he gave her a kind of a shove, and she said,
"You are, silly ass."
and he said,
What ho!
all of which shows you, I mean to say, the stage they had got to by this time. Nothing definitely settled, of course, but love obviously beginning to burgeon in the girl's heart.
Well, naturally. Freddie gave a good deal of thought during the drive to this father of whom the girl had spoken so feelingly, and he resolved that he would not fail her. The way he would suck up to the old dad would be nobody's business. He proposed to exert upon him the full force of his magnetic personality and looked forward to registering a very substantial hit. Which being so, we need scarcely tell you, knowing Freddie, as you do, that his first act on entering Sir Mortimer Prenderby's orbit was to make the scaliest kind of floater, hitting him on the back of the neck with a tortoiseshell cat not 10 minutes after his arrival. His train having been a bit late, there was no time on reaching the house for any stately receptions or any of that welcome to Meadowsweet Hall stuff. The girl simply shot him up to his room and told him to dress like a streak, because dinner was in a quarter of an hour, and then buzzed off to don the soup and fish herself. And Freddie was just going well when, looking round for his shirt, which he had left on the bed, he saw a large tortoiseshell cat standing on it, kneading it with its paws. Well, you know how a fellow feels about his shirt front. For an instant, Freddie stood spellbound. Then, with a hoarse cry, he bounded forward, scooped up the animal, and carrying it out onto the balcony, flung it into the void. And an elderly gentleman coming round the corner at this moment received a direct hit on the back of his neck.
Hell!
A head popped out of a window.
Whatever's the matter, my Mortimer?
It's raining cats.
Nonsense. Oh, it's a lovely evening,
Said the head and disappeared. Freddie thought an apology would be in order.
I say,
The old gentleman looked in every direction of the compass and finally located Freddie on his balcony.
I'm awfully sorry about that nasty buffet. It was me.
It was not you. It was a cat.
I know. I threw the cat.
Why?
Well,
Damn fool.
I'm sorry.
Go to blazes.
Freddie backed into the room and the incident closed. Freddie is a pretty slippy dresser as a rule, but this episode had shaken him, and he not only lost a collar stud, but made a mess of the first 2 ties. The result was that the gong went well while he was still in his shirt sleeves, and on emerging from his boudoir, he was informed by a footman that the gang were already nuzzling their bouillon in the dining room. He paused, he pushed straight on there accordingly, and sank into a chair beside his hostess just in time to dead heat with the final spoonful. Awkward, of course, but he was feeling in pretty good form, owing to the pleasantness of the thought that he was shoving his knees under the same board as the girl Dahlia. So, having nodded to his host, who was glaring at him from the head of the table, as much as to say that all would be explained in God's good time, he shot his cuffs and started to make sparkling conversation to Lady Prenderby.
Charming place we have here, what?
Lady Prenderby said that the local scenery was generally admired. She was one of those tall, rangy, Queen Elizabeth sort of women with tight lips and cold, blanc-mange eyes. Freddie didn't like her looks much, but he was feeling, as I say, fairly fizzy, so he carried on with a bright zip.
Pretty good hunting country, I should think.
Well, I believe there's a good deal of hunting near here, yes.
I thought as much. That's the stuff, is it not? A cracking gallop across good country with a jolly fine kill at the end of it. What, hark forward, yoicks, tally-ho, I mean to say, and all that sort of thing?
Lady Prenderby shivered austerely.
I fear I cannot share your enthusiasm. I have the strongest possible objection to hunting. I have always set my face against it, as against all similar, brutalizing blood sports.
This was a nasty jar for poor old Freddie, who had been relying on the topic to carry him nicely through at least a couple of courses. It silenced him for the nonce. And as he paused to collect his faculties, his host, who had now been glowering for 6.5 minutes practically without cessation, put a hand in front of his mouth and addressed the girl Dahlia across the table. Freddie thinks he was under the impression that he was speaking in a guarded whisper, but, as a matter of fact, the words boomed through the air as if he had been a costermonger calling attention to his Brussels sprouts.
Dahlia?
Yes, Father?
Who's that ugly feather?
Hush!
What do you mean, hush? Who is he?
Mr. Widgeon.
Mr. Who?
Widgeon.
I wish you would articulate clearly and not mumble.
It sounds to me just like widgeon. Who asked him here?
I did.
Why?
He's a friend of mine.
Well, he looks a pretty frightful young slab of damnation to me. What I'd call a criminal face.
Hush!
Why do you keep saying hush? Must be a lunatic, too. Throws cats at people.
Please, Father.
Don't say please, Father. No sense in it. I tell you, he does throw cats at people. He threw one at me. Half-witted, I'd call him, if that. Besides, being the most offensive-looking young toad I've ever seen on the premises, how long is he staying?
Till Monday.
My God! And today's only Friday.
It was an unpleasant situation for Freddie, of course, and I'm bound to admit he didn't carry it off particularly well. What he ought to have done, obviously, was to have plunged into an easy flow of small talk, but all he could think of to ask Lady Prenderby was if she was fond of shooting. Lady Prenderby, having replied that owing to being deficient in the savage instincts and wanton bloodlust that went to make a callous and cold-hearted murderess, she was not. He relapsed into silence with his lower jaw hanging down.
All in all, he wasn't so dashed sorry when the dinner came to an end, as he and Sir Mortimer were the only men at the table, most of the seats having been filled by a covey of mildewed females whom he had classified under the general heading of as aunts. It seemed to Freddie that the moment had now arrived when they would be able to get together once more, under happier conditions than those of their last meeting, and start to learn to appreciate one another's true worth. He looked forward to a cozy tete-a-tete over the port, in the course of which he would smooth over that cat incident, and surely do all that lay within his power to revive the unfavorable opinion of him which the other must have formed.
But apparently Sir Mortimer had his own idea of the duties and obligations of a host. Instead of clustering round Freddie with decanters, he simply gave him a long, lingering look of distaste and shot out of the French window into the garden. A moment later, his head reappeared, and he uttered the words,
You and your damn cats.
Then the night swallowed him again. Freddie was a good deal perplexed. All this was new stuff to him. He had been in and out of a number of country houses in his time, but this was the first occasion on which he had ever been left flat at the conclusion of the evening meal, and he wasn't quite sure how to handle the situation. He was still wondering when Sir Mortimer's head came into view again, and its owner, after giving him another one of those long, lingering looks, said,
Cats, forsooth.
and disappeared once more. Freddie was now definitely piqued. It was all very well, he felt, Dahlia Prenderby telling him to make himself solid with her father, but how can you make yourself solid with a fellow who doesn't stay put for a couple of consecutive seconds? It was as if Sir Mortimer's intention to spend the remainder of the night flashing past like a merry-go-round, there seemed little hope of anything amounting to a genuine rapprochement. It was a relief to his feelings when there suddenly appeared from nowhere his old acquaintance, the tortoise-shell cat. It seemed to offer him a means of working off his spleen.
Taking from Lady Prenderby's plate, accordingly, the remains of a banana, he plugged the animal at a range of 2 yards. It yowled and withdrew. And a moment later, there was Sir Mortimer again.
Did you kick that cat?
Freddie had half a mind to ask the old disease if he thought he was a man or a jack-in-the-box, but the breeding of the widgeons restrained him.
No, I did not kick that cat.
You must have done something to it to make it come charging out at 40 miles an hour.
I merely offered the animal a piece of fruit.
Do it again and see what happens to you.
Lovely evening.
No, it's not, you silly ass.
Freddie rose. His nerve, I fancy, was a little shaken.
I shall join the ladies.
God help them.
Replied Sir Mortimer Prenderby in a voice instinct with the deepest feeling, and vanished once more. Freddie's mood as he made for the drawing room was thoughtful. I don't say he has much sense, but he's got enough to know when he is and when he isn't going with a bang. Tonight, he realized that he had been very far from going in such a manner. It was not, that is to say, as the idol of Matcham's scratchings that he would enter the drawing room, but rather as a young fellow who had made an unfortunate first impression and would have to do a lot of heavy ingratiating before he could regard himself as really popular in the home. He must bustle about, he felt, and make up leeway. And knowing that what counts with these old-style females who had lived in the country all their lives is the exhibition of these little politenesses and attentions which were all the go to Queen Victoria's time. His first action on entering was to make a dive for one of the aunts who seemed to be trying to find a place to put her coffee cup.
Permit me.
Said Freddie, suave to the eyebrows, and bounding forward with the feeling that this was the stuff to give them, he barged right into a cat.
Meow!
Oh, sorry.
He said, backing and bringing down his heel on another.
I say, most frightfully sorry.
And tottering to a chair, he sank heavily onto a third cat.
Meow!
Well, he was up and about again in a jiffy, of course, but it was too late. There was the usual, not at all-ing and don't mention a ting, but he could read between the lines. Lady Prenderby's eyes had rested on his for only a brief instant, but it had been enough. His standing with her, he perceived, was now approximately what King Herod's would have been at an Israelite mother's social Saturday afternoon. The girl Dahlia, during these exchanges, had been sitting on a sofa at the end of the room, turning the pages of a weekly paper, and the sight of her drew Freddie like a magnet. Her womanly sympathy was just what he felt he could do with at this junction. Treading with infinite caution, he crossed to where she sat, and having scanned the terrain narrowly for cats, sank down on the sofa on her side. And conceive his agony of spirit when he discovered that the womanly sympathy had been turned off at the main. The girl was like a chunk of ice cream with spikes all over it.
Please do not trouble to explain.
She said coldly in answer to his opening words.
I quite understand that there are people who have this odd dislike of animals.
But dash it.
Cried Freddie, waving his arms in a frenzied sort of way.
Oh, I'm sorry.
He added as his fist sloshed another of the menagerie in the short ribs. Dahlia caught the animal as it flew through the air.
I think perhaps you'd better take Augustus, Mother. He seems to be annoying Mr. Widgeon.
Quite. You will be safer with me.
But dash it.
Dahlia Prenderby drew in her breath sharply.
How true it is that one never really knows a man till after one has seen him in one's own home.
What do you mean by that?
Oh, nothing.
She rose and moved to the piano, where she proceeded to sing old Breton folk songs in a distant manner, leaving Freddie to make out as best he could with a family album containing faded photographs of Aunt Emmy bathing at Ludno, 1893,
And this is Cousin George at the fancy dress ball.
written under them, as noted by the aunts. And as the long, quiet, peaceful home evening wore on, till eventually Lady Prenderby mercifully blew the whistle, and he was at liberty to sneak off to his bedroom. You might have supposed that Freddie's thoughts, as he toddled upstairs with his candle, would have dwelt exclusively on the girl Dahlia. This, however, was not so. He did give her obvious shirtiness a certain measure of attention, of course, but what really filled his mind was the soothing reflection that at long last his patch and that of the animal kingdom of Matcham's scratchings had now divided. He, so to speak, was taking the high road, while they, as it were, would take the low road. For whatever might be the conditions prevailing in the dining room, the drawing room, and the rest of the house, His bedroom, he felt, must surely be totally free from all cats of all descriptions.
Remembering, however, that unfortunate episode before dinner, he went down on all fours and subjected the various nooks and crannies to a close examination. His eyes could detect no cats. Relieved, he rose to his feet with a gay song on his lips.
Happy days are here again, those
And he
golden
hadn't
days
got
are
much beyond
here
the first couple of bars when a voice behind him suddenly started taking the bait. Turning, he perceived on the bed a fine bulldog. Freddie looked at the dog. The dog looked at Freddie. The situation was one fraught with embarrassment. A glance at the animal was enough to convince him that it had got an entirely wrong angle on the position of affairs and was regarding him purely in the light of an intrusive stranger who had muscled in on his private sleeping quarters. Its manner was plainly resentful. It fixed Freddie with a cold yellow eye and curled its upper lip slightly, the better to display a long white tooth. It also twitched its nose and gave a sotto voce imitation of distant thunder. Freddie did not know quite what avenue to explore. It was impossible to climb between the sheets with a thing like that on the counterpane. To spend the night in a chair, on the other hand, would have been foreign to his policy. He did what I consider the most statesmanlike thing by sidling out onto the balcony and squinting along the wall of the house to see if there wasn't a lighted window hard by, behind which might lurk somebody who would rally round and aid and comfort. There was a lighted window only a short distance away, so he shoved his head out as far as it would stretch and said,
I say!
There being no response, he repeated.
I say!
And finally, to drive his point home, he added,
I say, I say, I say!
This time he got results. The head of Lady Prenderby suddenly protruded from the window.
Who is making that abominable noise?
It was not precisely the attitude Freddie had hoped for, but he would take the rough with the smooth.
It's me, Widgeon, Frederick.
Oh, must you sing on your balcony, Mr. Widgeon?
I wasn't singing. I was saying, I say.
Oh, what were you saying?
I say.
You say what?
I was saying, I say. Kind of a heart cry, if you know what I mean. The fact is, there's a dog in my room.
What sort of dog?
A whacking great bulldog.
Oh, that would be Wilhelm. Good night, Mr. Widgeon.
The window closed. Freddie let out a heart-stricken yip.
But I say.
The window reopened.
Oh, really, Mr. Widgeon?
But what am I to do?
Do?
About the whacking great bulldog.
Lady Prenderby seemed to consider.
Oh, what? No sweet biscuits, and when the maid brings you in your tea in the morning, oh, please do not give him sugar. Simply a little milk in the saucer. He's on a diet. Good night, Mr. Widgeon.
Freddie was now pretty well nonplussed. No matter what his hostess might say about this beastly dog being on a diet, he was convinced from its manner that its medical advisor had not forbidden it widgeons. And once more he bent his brain to the task of ascertaining what to do next. There were several possible methods of procedure. His balcony being not so very far from the ground, he could, if he pleased, jump down and pass a health-giving night in the nasturtium bed. Or he might curl up on the floor. Or he might get out of the room and doss downstairs somewhere. This last scheme seemed about the best. The only obstacle in the way of its fulfillment was the fact that, when he started for the door, his roommate would probably think he was a burglar about to loot silver of a lonely country house and pin him. Still, it had to be risked, and a moment later he might have been observed tiptoeing across the carpet with all the caution of a slackwire artist who isn't any too sure he remembers the correct steps.
Well, it was a near thing. At the instant when he started, the dog seemed occupied with something that looked like a cushion on the bed. It was licking this object in a thoughtful way and paid no attention to Freddie till he was halfway across no man's land. Then it suddenly did a sort of sitting high jump in his direction. And 2 seconds later, Freddie was, with a drafty feeling about the seat of his trousers, was on top of a wardrobe, with the dog underneath, looking up. He tells me that if he had ever moved quicker in his life, it was only on the occasion when, a lad of 14, he was discovered by his uncle, Lord Blichester, smoking one of the latter's cigars in the library. And he rather thinks he must have clipped at least 1/5 of a second off the record, then set up. It looked to him now as if his sleeping arrangements for the night had been settled for him, and the thought of having to roost on top of a wardrobe at the whim of a dog was pretty dashed offensive to his proud spirit, as you may well imagine. However, as you cannot reason with a bulldog, it seemed the only thing to be done, and he was trying to make himself as comfortable as a sharp piece of wood sticking into the fleshy part of his leg would permit, when there was a snuffling noise in the passage, and through the door came an object which, in the dim light, he was at first not able to identify. It looked something like a pen wiper and something like a piece of a hearth rug. Second and keener inspection revealed it as a Pekingese puppy. The uncertainty which Freddie had felt as to the newcomer's status was shared, as it appeared, by the bulldog. For after raising its eyebrows in a puzzled manner, it rose and advanced inquiringly. In a tentative way, it put out a paw and rolled the intruder over. Then, advancing again, it lowered its nose and sniffed. It was a course of action against which its best friends would have advised it. These peaks are tough eggs, especially when, as in this case, female. They look the world in the eye and are swift to resent familiarity. There was a sort of explosion. And the next moment, the bulldog was shooting out of the room with its tail between its legs, hotly pursued. Freddie could hear the noise of the battle rolling away along the passage, and it was music to his ears. Something on these lines was precisely what that bulldog had been asking for, and now it had got it. Presently, the peak returned, dashing the beads of perspiration from his forehead, and came and sat under the wardrobe, wagging his stumpy tail. And Freddie, feeling that the all clear had been blown, and that he was now at liberty to descend, did so.
His first move was to shut the door. His second, to fraternize with his preserver. Freddie is a chap who believes in getting credit where credit is due, and it seemed to him that this peak had shown itself an ornament of its species. He spared no effort, accordingly, to entertain it. He lay down on the floor and let it lick his face 233 times. He tickled it under the left ear, the right ear, and at the base of the tail, in the order named. He also scratched its stomach. All these attentions the animal received with cordiality and marked gratification, and as it seemed still in pleasure-seeking mood, and had plainly come to look upon him as the official master of the revels, Freddie, feeling that he could not disappoint it, but must play the host no matter what the cost to himself, took off his tie and handed it over. He couldn't have done it for anybody, he says, but where this life-saving peak was concerned, the sky was the limit.
Well, the tie went like a breeze. It was a success from the start. The peak chewed it and chased it and got entangled in it and dragged it about the room and was just starting to shake it from side to side when an unfortunate thing happened. Misjudging its distance, it banged its head a nasty wallop against the leg of the bed. There is nothing of the Red Indian at the stake about a puppy in circumstances like this. A moment later, Freddie's blood was chilled by a series of fearful shrieks that seemed to ring through the night like the dying cries of the party of the second part to a first-class murder. It amazed him that a mere peak, and a juvenile peak at that, should have been capable of producing such an uproar. He says that a baronet, stabbed in the back with a paper knife in his library, could not have made half such a row. Eventually, the agony seemed to abate. Quite suddenly, as if nothing had happened, the peak stopped yelling, and with an amused smile, started to play with the tie again. And at the same moment, there was a sound of whispering outside, and then a knock at the door.
Hello?
It is I, Sir Biggleswade,
Who's Biggleswade?
the butler, sir.
What do you want?
Her ladyship wishes me to remove the dog which you are torturing.
There was more whispering.
Her ladyship also desires to say that she will be reporting the affair in the morning to the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals.
There was another spot of whispering.
Her ladyship further instructs me to add that, should you prove recalcitrant, I am to strike you over the head with the poker.
Well, you can't say this was pleasant for poor old Freddie, and he didn't think so himself. He opened the door to perceive without a group consisting of Lady Prenderby, her daughter Dahlia, a few assorted aunts, and the butler with poker. And he says he met Dahlia's eyes, and they went through him like a knife.
Let me explain.
Oh, spare us the details.
Said Lady Prenderby with a shiver. She scooped up the peak and felt it for broken bones.
But listen.
Good night, Mr. Widgeon.
The aunt said good night too, and so did the butler.
Night.
The girl Dahlia preserved a revolted silence.
But honestly, it was nothing, really. It banged its head against the bed.
What did he say?
Asked one of the aunts who was a little hard of hearing.
He said he banged the poor creature's head against the bed. Dreadful.
Hideous!
The second aunt opened up another line of thought.
With men like Freddie in the house, is anybody safe?
She mooted the possibility of them all being murdered in their beds, and though Freddie offered to give her a written guarantee that he hadn't the slightest intention of going anywhere near her bed, the idea seemed to make a deep impression.
Biggleswade,
Milady.
you will remain in this passage for the remainder of the night with your poker.
Very good, milady.
Should this man attempt to leave his room, you will strike him smartly over the head.
Just so, milady.
But listen.
Good night, Mr. Widgeon.
The mob scene broke up. Soon the passage was empty save for Biggleswade, the butler, who had begun to pace up and down, halting every now and then to flick the air with his poker, as if testing the lissomeness of his wrist muscles and satisfying himself that they were in a condition to ensure the right amount of follow-through. The spectacle he presented was so unpleasant that Freddie withdrew into his room and shut the door. His bosom, as you may imagine, was surging with distressing emotions. That look which Dahlia Prenderby had given him had churned him up to no little extent. He realized that he had a lot of tense thinking to do, and to assist thought, he sat down on the bed. Or rather, to be accurate, on the dead cat which was lying on the bed. It was this cat which the bulldog had been licking just before the final breach in his relations with Freddie, the object, if you remember, which the latter had supposed to be a cushion. He leaped up as if the corpse, instead of being cold, had been piping hot. He stared down, hoping against hope that the animal was merely in some sort of coma, but a glance told him that it had made the great change. He had never seen a deader cat. After life's fitful fever, it slept well. You wouldn't be far out in saying that poor old Freddie was now appalled. Already his reputation in this house was at zero, his name mud. On all sides he was looked upon as Widgeon the amateur vivisectionist. This final disaster could not but put the tin hat on it. Before, he had had a faint hope that in the morning, when calmer moods would prevail, he might be able to explain that matter of the peak. But who was going to listen to him if he were discovered with a dead cat on his person?
And then the thought came to him that it might be possible not to be discovered with it on his person. He had only to nip downstairs and deposit the remains in the drawing room or somewhere, and suspicion might not fall upon him. After all, in a super-catted house like this, cats must always be dying like flies all over the place. A housemaid would find the animal in the morning and report to GHQ that the cat strength of the establishment had been reduced by 1, and there would be a bit of tut-tutting and perhaps a silent tear or two, and then the thing would be forgotten. The thought gave him new life. All briskness and efficiency, he picked up the body by the tail and was just about to dash out of the room when, with a silent groan, he remembered Biggleswade. He peeped out. It might be that the butler, once the eye of authority had been removed, had departed to get the remainder of his beauty sleep. But no. Service and fidelity were evidently the watchwords of Macham's scratchings. There the fellow was, still practicing half-arm shots with the poker. Freddie closed the door. And as he did so, he suddenly thought of the window. There lay the solution. Here he had been fooling about with doors and thinking in terms of drawing rooms, and all the while there was the balcony staring him in the face. All he had to do was to shoot the body out into the silent night and let gardeners, not housemaids, discover it. He hurried out. It was a moment for swift action. He raised his burden. He swung it to and fro, working up steam. Then he let it go, and from the dark garden there came suddenly the cry of a strong man in his anger.
Who threw that cat?
It was the voice of his host, Sir Mortimer Prenderby.
Show me the man who threw that cat.
Windows flew up. Heads came out. Freddie sank to the floor of the balcony and rolled against the wall.
Whatever is the matter, Mortimer?
Let me at the man who hit me in the eye with a cat.
A cat?
Lady Prenderby's voice sounded perplexed.
Are you sure?
Sure? What do you mean, sure? Of course I'm sure. I was just dropping off to sleep in my hammock, and suddenly a great beastly cat came whizzing through the air and caught me properly in the eyeball. It's a nice thing. A man can't sleep in hammocks in his own garden without people pelting him with cats. I insist on the blood of the man who threw that cat.
Where did it come from?
Oh, it must have come from that balcony there.
Mr. Widgeon's balcony,
said Lady Prenderby in an acid voice.
as I might have guessed.
Sir Mortimer uttered a cry.
So might I have guessed. Widgeon, of course, that ugly feller. He's been throwing cats all the evening. I've got a nasty sore space on the back of my neck where he hit me with one before dinner. Somebody come and open the front door. I want my heavy cane, the one with the carved ivory handle, or a horsewhip will do.
Wait, Mortimer. Do nothing rash. The man is evidently a very dangerous lunatic. I will send Biggleswade to overpower him. He has the kitchen poker.
Little remains to be told. At 2:15 that morning, a somber figure in dress clothes without a tie limped into the little railway station of Lower Smattering-on-the-Whistle, some 6 miles from Matcham Scratchings. At 3:47, it departed Londonwards on the up-milk train. It was Frederick Widgeon. He had a broken heart and blisters on both heels, and in that broken heart was that loathing for all cats of which you recently saw so signal a manifestation. I am revealing no secrets when I tell you that Freddie Widgeon is permanently through with cats. From now on, they cross his path at their peril.
Happy Thanksgiving,
Happy Thanksgiving,
everyone.
Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
So now we're going to end with a few songs that Swami Kriyananda wrote. They're Shakespeare songs. And Chaitanya is going to come up and he's going to explain one of them. It definitely needs an explanation, especially. Well, it's called "Come Away Death," and it's actually not quite what it sounds. But Chaitanya, I'm going to turn the microphone over to him, and he's going to explain the song.
This is from Shakespeare's Twelfth Night. It is played the 12th night, and this particular thing that Shakespeare wrote was this guy describing how he got how his girlfriend broke up with him unexpectedly, and it just, as you were talking earlier, his intellect really took him into despair. I mean, really over the top. So much so it's almost funny. Well, it is funny. He writes a little poem about it, which Swami put to music, and some of the words that might not make any sense to you. They talk about his shroud. This is wiping him out to the point he's dying, and he's in his casket, and they've wrapped him in a shroud of white that's stuck with yew needles, which are poisonous needles. And nobody's come to his funeral, and it just goes on and on and on. It's all metaphor, yeah. It didn't actually happen. This guy's in his mind, he's really, really depressed. So we'll play that.
So that'll be one that we'll play. That's "Come Away Death." And just so you know, these were all songs that the words, Shakespeare wrote the words, but and the concepts. And then what Swami did was he put them to music. So when you hear them, Swami is singing them. And you always want to remember to get behind whatever it is that you're watching or listening to, and try to tune into it on that level. And of course, with Swami singing it, that's a double thing to check out, because of course with Shakespeare's words and Swami's vibration, that's a pretty powerful combination. And we're going to do 3 other songs, and let's see, "Come Away Death" and "O Mistress Mine." The 2 of those are from 12th Night. And let's see, is that right, Chaitanya? "O Mistress Mine." Then which one was from Cymbeline? Okay. And then there's another one, "Hark, Hark the Lark," and that's from Cymbeline. That's probably one of his lesser-known plays. It's another play by Shakespeare. And then the last song is the Invocation to Woodland Devas. And I'm going to read to you what that song means and what it came from. And these were Swami's words and music. And so he said, "This song came to me while I was visiting the English countryside not far from the town of Hastings. And for the first time, perhaps, I felt the presence, whether real or imagined, of fairies and minor deities populating the woods and fields. Paramahansa Yogananda wrote in Autobiography of a Yogi, and later in his interpretation of the Bhagavad Gita, that these beings exist. In the latter book, he explained the rationale for maintaining with them a relationship of reciprocal service and goodwill." So there's a touch of magic with us tonight as Chaitanya plays these for us.
Come away, dear, and in sad cypress let me be laid. Fly away, breath. I am slain by a fair, cruel maid. My shroud of white stuck all with you. Oh, prepare it, my part of death, no one so true did share it. last sweet. On my black coffin let there be strewn not a friend greet my poor corpse where my bones shall be thrown. 1,000 sighs to save, lay me, oh, where sat true love and never find my grave to weep there. Sat true love and never find my grave to weep there. Hark, hark, the lark at heaven's gate sings, and fever skins arise. His steeds to water at those springs on chaliced flowers that lies. And winking merry bards begin to ope their golden eyes. With everything that pretty is, my lady sweet, arise, arise, arise.
You devas of woodlands, of mountains and field, come shower on us blessings and light. The wonders that nature befriended can yield, reveal to our hearing and sight. Your melodies whispering joy on the air, affirm that God's everywhere. O devas of woodlands, of mountains and field, be with us in blessing this night. You devas of woodlands, of mountain and field, come shower on us blessings and light. The wonders that nature befriended can yield, reveal to our hearing and sight. Your melodies whispering joy on the air, affirm that God's everywhere. O devas of woodland, of mountain and field, be with us in blessing this night.
Mistress mine, where are you roaming? Oh, stay and hear your true love's coming, that can sing both high and low. Trip no further, pretty sweeting, journeys ended, lovers meeting. Every wise man's son doth know, every wise man's son doth know. What is love? 'Tis not hereafter. Present mirth hath present laughter. delay, there lies no plenty. Then come kiss me, sweet and 20. Use the stuff will not endure. Use the stuff will not endure.
Let's just meditate for a few moments, feeling the consciousness that we just witnessed in this music, in Swami's vibration. Let's end with a prayer. Divine Mother, Heavenly Father, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, friend and guide, Swami Kriyananda. Thank you for this opportunity to dive into your joy, to feel your love. May we move forward in a spirit of joy and love, sharing your creative energy with all. Om, peace. Amen. Thank you. Go out with joy.